Let's bring in our political analysts, Roland Martin, Mary Matalin. They're both here. Roland, first to you. How surprised were you by this since you live in Chicago and you've been watching this trial very closely?
Well, it has been startling because this trial has gone on for only about 30 days. I mean, typically, if you look at the trial of former Governor George Ryan, who was convicted of taking money from one of his campaign donors, I mean, that trial went on for months. And so this thing was sort of on speed dial, if you will. Then all of a sudden, when we saw the jury, day after day not reaching a decision, it was sort of like in Chicago, hey, what in the world is going on? Now they come back, only convict him on one count, hung on 23. It also begs, look, the FBI is going to be in for some tough questioning as well, because remember, they arrested Rod Blogojevich, and it was stated before a deal actually commenced. They felt that something was about to happen as it related to the U.S. Senate seat of former Senator Barack Obama in terms of Blagojevich making that appointment. And don't be surprised if they are unable to send him to prison beyond this one count. They might say, wait a minute, did you move too early before something happened? Because, again, they have tapes and everything else. But if they were unable to convict him with even those tapes, what does that actually mean?
Mary Matalin is with us as well. Mary, I want to get your reaction. We're just getting a statement, by the way, from Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., and he says this, reacting to the verdict. Unfortunately, the pain and embarrassment that this whole situation has caused our great state will not come to a complete close today. As for me, I repeat what I've said all along. My interest in the Senate seat was based on years of public service, not some improper scheme with Blagojevich or anyone else. I look forward to continuing to work hard on behalf of the people of the 2nd Congressional District of Illinois. He got his name dragged into this, as you will remember. Mary, correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't you from Chicago originally as well?
I am, and my brother is still there. I still have family there.
So you know what's going on in Chicago. You watched this. Were you surprised that he was convicted on only one of these 24 counts, the one count, the conviction on making false statements to the FBI?
Yes, well, given what the government put out there, how much time, how many resources, all these big brains, the heavy hand of the government in there, it is shocking. Everyone's talking about Blagojevich's victory. His victory will be dependent on what he does with this, and he is right. My colleague there is right that he wants to be a reality TV star, so this is victory for him. But it's a huge defeat for the government. They did not make their case, whether it was hung or a mistrial, on 23 counts. They have far more resources, far greater brain power, every tool available to them, and they lost on 23 counts. And whoever made this point earlier, I think very smart David Gergen made, the government has to be careful on appearing to be heavy-handed in this case. The jury has spoken.
You know this U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, Mary Matalin. You know him in the sense that he's the same U.S. Attorney who was involved in that Valerie Plame, the outing of the CIA, and the eventual the conviction of Dick Cheney, the former vice president's chief of staff. You know how determined Patrick Fitzgerald, how dogged he can be.
And I also know this from 30 years in Washington, as one of the famous lawyers there said, you can indict a ham sandwich if you want. But when the entire weight of the government comes down on you and they're squeezing you and they want somebody, it's a terrifying experience. Their heavy-handedness would be about the only thing that could make a sympathetic character out of Blagojevich, who is otherwise a clown. But he's the kind of political clown that people think who committed the crime that people think all politicians commit, which is he's horse trading. That's not a crime. That's just their business, is what people think. I'm not condoning him. I'm not defending him. I'm just saying it really disturbs people when the government can bring that kind of heavy-handedness to bear on a private citizen.
Are you in agreement with Mary, Roland?
Well, I think she's absolutely right in terms of what the perception is, because we see this every single day. We hear stories, people who have worked on Capitol Hill, in state legislators, in city halls all across the country, where folks sit here and say, hey, I'll support your bill, you support my bill. There's an expectation that people out there who support somebody running for office likely will be appointed to these various positions. People who give money to people who running for president all of a sudden end up being ambassadors to various countries. And that simply didn't happen just by happenstance. It is an expectation. But also, the defense of Blagojevich was very interesting. They focused from the outset of, here's a guy who runs his mouth, comes up with all kind of crazy stuff, but nothing ever came out of this. I think that is going to be a difficult issue once we begin to hear how the jury came down as to whether or not they actually thought he went through on a lot of these schemes. They made it seem like it's just a bunch of talk from a madman, and he's used that to create himself this whole persona beyond the political office of being a reality star.
Guys, stand by. I want to bring David Gergen back into this conversation. Top officials from the Obama administration, David, they didn't have to go to Chicago and testify, including the White House Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, or Valerie Jarrett, a senior advisor to the President of the United States, David. But if there's a retrial, and Patrick Fitzgerald, the U.S. attorney, says there will be a retrial on these 23 other counts, they may not necessarily be spared the next time around.
They could easily be called, and I think that's what the lawyer for Robert Blagojevich was trying to say. He doesn't know which way this is going to break. But I think it's in particular on that that Fitzgerald is going to have some very compelling reasons why he would suddenly now bring somebody from the White House in on the second time around, because it goes to this question of heavy-handedness. He has to be. I think it's very, very important what happens in the next day or two when we learn whether those jurors were basically, a majority of them came down on Blagojevich's side on each one of these counts, or whether the majority of them actually thought he was guilty and a minority held out against it. That's going to make a big difference in how we interpret this retrial and how heavy-handed we think the government is, and, by the way, how guilty we think Blagojevich may be.
Dramatic developments in Chicago on this day. Guys, thanks very much.